Welcome to the Convergence Podcast. I'm your host, Ashok Shivanan.
What I love about Agile and Beyond is we really lean into the beyond here. For folks who are either using Agile or learning about Agile, it's a great place to be, but it's also a great place to be to just expand your mind.
On this show, we'll deconstruct the best practices, principles, and the underlying philosophies behind the most engaged product teams who ship the most successful products. This is what teams are made of. Welcome back, folks. On this episode, I get to record live at Agile and Beyond, a conference in Detroit in May. I got to speak with a number of the presenters and speakers about their subject matter expertise. Everything from OKRs and product measurement to a ton of topics around building really great balanced product teams. Concepts like how object-oriented UX can help bring together the customer, the business, and the technologist to speak a common language that leads to better architecture. On how to bring the best archetype for the type of problem you're solving. And also a conversation around the spirituality versus a dogmatic religion of Agile and how that dogma can be really risky. Of course, there were a ton of experts on artificial intelligence at this conference. And we got to hear about everything from a history of artificial intelligence and machine learning and how those applications were built 10, 15 years ago, through to how generative AI is being used today by product development teams, where it helps us speed up and reduce risk, and where it maybe doesn't add as much value along the product development lifecycle. We also get to talk about innovation frameworks, as well as how we can bring some of these concepts of Agile and continuous improvement, not just to our product teams, but also to our personal lives. We did something a little bit different on this episode, where one of these segments, the guest is a wrong answers only guest. And I'm sure you'd be able to tell which one the parody segment is. Let me know in the comments. Hope you enjoy the episode, and maybe I'll catch you at the conference next year.
It's been great. The organizers did a fantastic job. It's been very smooth.
Certainly the first one I've spoken at ever.
Congrats.
Thanks. Yeah, just stoked to be here, meeting some folks, getting some free food. There's been some good talks. There's been some good sessions around AI and kind of the inevitability of all that stuff and what it means for how we do our work.
What I love about Agile and Beyond is we really lean into the beyond here. And so I think for folks who are either using Agile or learning about Agile, it's a great place to be, but it's also a great place to be to just expand your mind and look at, we are a keynote speaker about AI today, and just talking about topics that are beyond, some process and tools that we use for agility. Sure. I would definitely encourage people to look at attending, maybe even look at submitting a talk. It's a great place to get started speaking too.
It has been really a wonderful experience. And I really like the kind of and quality of sessions there, and the kind of enthusiasm from the participant was really great.
You're an OG of the show. I think I've seen you every time that I've been here. How long have you been coming to Agile and Beyond?
Since the inception of this conference. It started as part of Ford, I think, way back 12 or 14 years, and I never missed one. The biggest thing is actually the collection of people who are coming for a common purpose here, which is learning. I did my PhD, and a lot of things was just the traditional way. I don't mind what I went through to get here, but now I don't learn that traditional way. The biggest learning I do by either teaching or by seeing others doing it. I was talking to another speaker, and he's like, yeah, I've been teaching this stuff for a while. I'll send you my slides. So I'm learning, and I'm evolving, and I'm having a better connection with my network. And it's just a way of us to keep up with the new technologies, the new trends. And we mentioned AI before.
Every time I come to these conferences, it's like meeting old friends again. I've been coming to these conferences, I think, since the beginning of the Agile and Beyond series. Our organizers reminded us last night it was 12 years of Agile and Beyond conferences. Wow. And I'm pretty sure I've been at every one.
How long have you been coming to Agile and Beyond?
Well, I have been at Agile and Beyond, I think before it was Agile and Beyond. We used to get together and talk about Agile and product and technology things. So long time, a long time.
You're like one of the beta testers for Agile and Beyond.
And I can tell you that as a speaker, the process for submitting and getting accepted is very simple.
I see this as a collection of really the thought leaders in Detroit and even from outside Detroit coming together, right? Around it's really more the Beyond than the Agile. I think the Agile throws some people off, right? And they're like, oh, we've done Agile, we have Scrum teams, we have the basics. And it's so much about the Beyond. You know, the talks this year around AI and the product thinking from Melissa Perry, things like that. It's what is at the forefront in this area. And if you want to stay competitive with your, other competitors out there, you need to understand what's happening and how do you stay at the forefront of that. And I believe this is one of those events that's helping you to make sure you're staying up to speed with everything that's going on.
It's been great. Yeah, a really good mix of great people. It's a really diverse set of talks every single year, and different things come up every year. I really like that about the conference.
Oh, it's been great. I'm learning a lot of things, talking to a lot of people, and getting to have a lot of exposure around how other people are doing things.
I did really enjoy the keynote presentation yesterday. Melissa touched on, siloed teams and the problems that creates. It's not uncommon, right? It's a problem that doesn't seem to go away.
I did like the keynote today, and he did get me to think a little bit differently about certain things.
This conference got Melissa Perry to come keynote, and that's one of the things that she was talking about too, is the current state of companies and their products and the data that you need to make these decisions. Having that data be available is something that companies struggle with, and I see that a lot.
Up next, I get to speak with Holly Bilawa about OKRs and some of the mistakes and tips and tricks and core principles around measurement on product teams, the difference between customer value and business value.
So one of the largest root causes for trouble is that people don't know that there's a difference between business OKRs and product OKRs. So business OKRs are about what we want. We want to increase revenue, or we want to decrease costs, or we want to streamline operations, things like that. And those results are usually money, or saved money, or decreased risk, or something like that.
Yep.
Product OKRs are about our customers and our users. When it comes to things outside our four walls and we have to go find out, that requires product thinking and discovery and things like that are more difficult to implement. In larger organizations, people don't look at their software as software products, and they don't organize that way either. So it's harder to get a product OKR because you have to say basically as a hypothesis. Somebody said, how do you know those are even true or achievable? And the fact is, like, any of these things are hypotheses, but it's the idea that, we bet that if we do something, a customer will do something or a user will do something, and that will result in something good for us. But in terms of making the data available to decision make, it costs money to implement some of the metrics and dashboards you need as a product manager to make good decisions. So I think product operations is also very helpful. But, OKRs are supposed to align the organization around what they're delivering and help prioritize. But I've seen top-down OKRs. So Marty Kagan, who's a, big guy in the space, he's been out teaching OKRs, he and his organization. I've seen organizations go after OKRs so hard that 2 weeks later they end up with eval OKRs, individual eval OKRs. And when I said, no, that's not the thing, right? It's not a thing to do. But it was funny when I was doing research for my talk and I was reading the Wikipedia article on objectives and key results. That's one of the don'ts. That's a published don't on Wikipedia. Don't use OKRs in people's personal evaluations.
And when you say that, it means what leads to their promotions and compensations and those kind of stuff?
It's a real anti-pattern because, to get product right, it's so collaborative.
Yeah.
Right? It's so collaborative across the organization. And I have a slide about that in my deck where, promotion is vertical. Is usually vertical, and product thinking and good product practices collaborative across.
Yeah.
So now because of that, we're seeing the rise of chief product officer silos.
You mentioned something about product OKRs versus business OKRs.
Yeah.
What are some examples of customer or product OKRs that you've really liked in past companies or past executives?
Yeah, so there was one that was a customer an employee enabling product. It was a call center. So for a company that did trading, and the problem was that somebody would call with money and they would say, I have $60,000 and I want to deposit this and trade it. And the customer service representative would have to say, that's awesome, deposit your money, and when it clears in 3 days, you can start trading. So the OKR hypothesis statement was, we bet that if we create a way for that customer service rep to see the risk level of the customer who's calling in, like in line during that call, that we can allow that person who's low risk to start trading immediately. And because at that time it was per trade, it was like $2.50 per trade, having somebody start trading immediately was real revenue for the company. So that was, you would say, we bet that if we do this, the customer service rep will be able to allow the customer, so they were the user, and it took a while for this product to get funded by the company because it was an architect who was talking about it as a data lake. So he was talking about it in these very technical, I want to create a data lake where, customer data comes in and then it goes out, and it wasn't clear what the value was. So by creating an OKR, by really creating an OKR and figuring out about how much revenue do we think, like how many people do we think are low risk, that you could calculate real business results from that. And it ended up being a multi-million-dollar idea. Yeah.
So what are some ways that folks can get started? There's probably a lot of signal, a lot of noise, especially in the early days when you're saying I'm switching away from maybe a more traditional measurement system to OKRs for aligning folks.
So, I've always started this really simply. I've done, 2-day strategy sessions in person, where we get everyone together and talk about, what are we doing, why are we doing it, what does success look like? Because really the key results and being able to prioritize what you do is, what does success look like, and what are the most important indicators of success for this thing before we start actually saying we're going to do it. But having and aligning on what does success really look like over a period of time, that's fundamental. Those are fundamental conversations to OKRs.
Yep.
And aligning on it is fundamental to creating some stability to go find out more information. But it is a challenge because of the hierarchy. I worked on one with a data product one time, and it ended up being more about customers couldn't search for the data they wanted to buy. So it was about metadata. We don't have the right metadata on the data to serve this up to customers. Well, there needed to be some research about, okay, what data really needs metadata and what are customers searching for? And I'll tell you, there was nobody to do that work. So we have a problem in that a lot of BAs that I have known and worked with who might do that research, UX folks aren't enough, UX people, and there aren't enough people who are enabled to do real discovery, all up and down, up and down. It's just like when you're funding projects instead of results, you're not funding results. It's how soon can you complete this project?
Yeah.
And that's good project management, but it's not appropriate when we're talking about software products. You really want to be funding results and incentivizing results. The most important things prioritized first. That requires discovery, and there really isn't a lot of discovery going on in organizations right now of any size because they just didn't have their eye on that ball.
Yep.
And they're starting to now. So.
And what are some books or other resources online for folks to get started?
So I like Escaping the Bell Trap. So Melissa Perry might say that that's an elderly book, right? And she has a new one. But that book has been so helpful for leaders to understand that they're overbuilding and not set up to understand what they should be building and prioritizing. So I like that book. I think The new book, Product Operations, is a great reference book for all the pieces and parts and how to look at the reporting and what data you need. So I like that. So of course I'm partnered with Jeff Patton, and the user story mapping book, I'm not kidding you, but people still reference that book. I still have it dog-eared and highlighted, and it's still very helpful because story mapping is a bridging practice between business, product, and execution. And it's somewhere, Teresa Torres's book, Continuous Discovery Habits, also great. Also a great book. So those are really my top book. Marty Kagan's new book, Transformed. It's preachy, but it's also based on a lot of experience from product coaches. So I appreciate a lot of what's in that. I also appreciate the writing that he's done.
Fostering an engaged product organization and aligning them with the principles around lean, human-centered design, and agile will more than likely lead to successful business outcomes for your organization. But getting started or getting unblocked can be hard. This podcast is brought to you by the player coaches over at Integral. They help ambitious companies like you build amazing product teams and ship products in artificial intelligence, cloud, web, and mobile. Listeners to the podcast can head on over to integral.io/convergence and get a free product success lab. During this session, the Integral team will facilitate a problem-solving exercise that gives you clarity and confidence to solve a product, design, or engineering problem. That's integral.io/convergence. Now, back to the show. Danny Pressler from Integral talks to us about object-oriented user experience and how a highly collaborative team applying principles of object-oriented UX can create a really solid foundation of a common language that business stakeholders, customer stakeholders, and technical stakeholders can use in order to maintain a really flexible code base.
UX stands for object-oriented user experience. And really it's a philosophy, it's a toolkit that exploits a reality about how our brains are wired. And that is, we as humans, we think in terms of objects. So to continue talking about it, we should probably define what that nebulous word means. And in digital abstractions of our physical world, i.e. applications objects are the things people care about in these apps, right? So if you think about shopping on Amazon's web app, an obvious object is the product, right? Mm-hmm. The fidget spinner, whatever we're looking at buying. And as we cruise down the product page on the fidget spinner, we find reviews, which are a very important nested object that may help us decide to buy or not to buy that product. And really it's one of the low-hanging fruit wins of OUX is that contextual navigation of objects and things that they have relationships to in the mental model of the users.
What are some things you maybe notice on your team as symptoms? If there isn't enough of like that OUX mindset or patterns in play, what are some of those symptoms or problems that a team out there may have?
There's a couple big ones. So calling one thing different names, you see a lot, or calling two different things by the same name or a similar name. And you can see how that disparity or that sort of chaos around one thing, it's going to trickle its way into the code itself. Right? So what does the engineer call the thing that the product managers and designers talk about every day? It could be different. Mm-hmm. And that can trickle its way into classes and functions in the actual code. So it brings to mind Eric Evans' Domain-Driven Design, 2004 book he wrote about ubiquitous language. He takes it a step further and says that those names that you come up with that are in concrete, they need to be circulated in the team and in their minds, but also into the code itself, so that when the engineer goes to update the object, the PM can actually look at that code and kind of understand what they're doing, or at least have an anchor of understanding to start with.
Where do you think the value of OUX really comes into play?
It comes into play in collaborative, balanced teams. A very important point is that you don't start designing, you don't start sketching and prototyping and wireframing until well into the game. So that means your PMs, your subject matter experts, and your engineers definitely need to be involved in those early rounds of discovery, requirements, and prioritization, so that you all have a shared language, you're calling things the same, you understand the attributes of all of your objects in the same way, and you can talk about them the same way. And it's really that collaborative game that gets me passionate about sharing it with others. Design by committee sucks, right? It's kind of a designer's nightmare to live design with several stakeholders on a call, right? That's not how we do our best work. But a caveat to that is when we're designing systems, when we're talking about the objects in a system, the attributes that create them, and the calls to action that we want to offer to our users, it's very important to get all stakeholders involved in those conversations and helping to prioritize which actions we're going to provide first and what are the first set of objects we're going to move forward with. And which ones can we bring in later as we have a solid foundation of the model. And that's another big benefit of the framework is that non-technical folks, myself and the PMs and the subject matter experts, we can get together and create an object map that's very well defined. It's validated with users. They helped us prioritize the attributes and how important they are and where they should show up on a page when we go to represent it. But beyond that, we can pass that object map off to engineering and directly impact information architecture. And when we start talking about the cardinality of objects to others in the system, engineers are going to be like, wow, you guys did a good part of my job for me, because they're creating technical designs that map these entities to one another in various ways. And OUX makes it an approachable way for non-technical folks to get their hands dirty and to pass off something really valuable, not just a high fidelity prototype that may or may not be connected to the model, but real core stuff that the engineers are going to have to figure out themselves anyways. So you might as well have it be user feedback based and concrete and bulletproof. The cost of change to go back and refactor all of that is miserable. So it's one of those things where, if you slow down, you can speed up. And I know here at Agile and Beyond, process isn't everyone's favorite guy to hang out with at the party, but OUX gives you bulletproof traditional UX deliverables, right? So that foundation's right. You avoid that Laffer curve of cost of change, and you stay close to that x-axis when you need to iterate.
And so let's say we're working on a team that's already in play. We've already got product out there. We've got a team in play. We've got our own existing way of working and our principles, and this is something we're looking to add and get the benefits of. What's some advice on what are the early stage steps to take to get started? Because I imagine it can be overwhelming.
It is. Luckily, we have Sophia Prater as sort of the leader in the space. She's got a self-paced masterclass and a certification course as well. I highly recommend the masterclass. I've taken it. And there's a fundamentals course and some other things, but just dive in. Go to OOUX.com, rewiredux.com as well. We'll take you there. She's got a great podcast.
Up next, I talked to Kristen Belcher from Agile Extended around how we bring ourselves to our product teams and their tool on how to help analyze that.
And you spoke about Spectrix.
Yep.
Tell me more about what that is.
Yeah, so Spectrix is a product that we created at Agile Extended to help people figure out what character they're playing in interpersonal scenarios. So we have a game board and a deck of cards, and you look at your archetype, and we have 5 different archetypes. We did a little quiz in my session, BuzzFeed style quiz, to figure out what your primary archetype might be. And you look at your primary and then what could be a secondary archetype and kind of find how you're showing up in a certain context. Nobody fits in a box. So there's 25 different characters that we have on the board that you could be playing, that you might see your teammates playing too. And you can kind of see, oh, I'm showing up as a surfer today, and I'm very exploratory and I'm going with the waves, but really I need to be in a more stabilizing mode because my team is in chaos, and me going with the waves is actually not helping them, right?
There's time to go surfing and there's time that we can't go surfing. What are some of the other characters? This is fascinating.
So there's a healer, there's a captain, a coach, coach is where I love to be. But we were having a conversation the other day where I'm like, oh, I think I'm being more of a cartographer right now.
What are some of the, I'm a sucker for like before and after pictures and the HGTV.
Yeah.
So what are like some of the before and after pictures of using the tool, and where do you tend to look to see that?
So observable behaviors is where you'll see it. And what it might look like before is people trying to talk to each other and just like completely missing, like I'm saying one thing, you're saying something else, but we're not having a conversation. We're just talking past each other.
Yeah.
So the observable behavior change after using Spectrix could be that I'm actually listening because now I'm seeing where you're coming from, and then we're making a change. Like we might actually be collaborating, and you might go, oh, well, now I see where you're coming from. Like you're really valuing, innovation in this space, and I'm really valuing quality right now. And so how can we innovatively, make sure we're ensuring quality as we work on this product together?
Fadi Khoury from the Integral Tech Group and I get to talk about the spirituality versus religion and dogma of Agile, and what tends to lead to Agile transformations going well and maybe not so well.
Various industries and various companies have different levels of success. And even maybe within those companies, different teams have different levels of business outcomes they can deliver. What are some trends you see in terms of what are some of those teams that are doing really well, or what are some of the things that happen to the teams that are having challenges?
So when you forget to focus on the basics and go back to the root of or the core of anything, that's where you start getting challenged. Challenges always come by the complexity that people bring into anything we do. Best teams, and it doesn't have to be an Agile team, best team, if you go back and think, what's the best teams I've been on, even if it's a sports team or even if it's a group of friends, why it's the best team you've been in and what the interactions you had to make it that great for you. How did you govern that enterprise or that team, and what are the boundaries around it? How did you define it? And you get to actually recognize that a lot of it's human behavior more than anything else, and human interactions. And this is what we actually forget when we're trying to do Agile. I did Agile before Agile was even Agile. We did rapid application development in the 90s, late 90s, and before even the manifesto came out and said this is how Agile is defined, we knew these are things that are good for us. It brings people together. It helps us to define value. It helps us to drive change. It helps us to evolve. It helps us to innovate. And we should do them as a team to be able to collaborate properly and move the goal the way we would like to. So Agile just came and maybe created some type of I'm gonna call it a loose guidelines for us to go with some of the principles, and where we start going in trouble is when we start creating the frameworks around it and we start to create a religion for Agile versus really keep it the spirituality aspect behind it. If you go always back to the spirituality aspect behind it, you're in good hands. If you actually go into the religious aspect, then that's probably the best way to describe it.
Then you're in safe, but in the different spelling of safe, right?
Exactly. Then in a different safe, and it's not that safe.
Yeah, sure. That's so amazing that you put it that way, because I think most of us want to be helpful, and we forget that, if you think about how the best way to earn trust is by giving trust, and trust and vulnerability are related, and asking for help is like an act of vulnerability. So if you show that, then you're showing like, hey, I'm letting my guard down.
Yep.
And maybe that's going to encourage. I never thought about it that way.
Yeah, letting your guard down is the key behind anything. Getting drunk with somebody lets your guard down, right?
Yeah.
So
chemical to do that.
So exactly. But also there's other ways. People don't drink. Yeah, there's other ways to find it. There's maybe sports that you like together, or there's an activity, there's a show. There's so many different things that comes in mind. Yeah.
Matt Barcombe from Product Cairn talks about product road mapping.
With respect to product, a hot topic that's coming up now, maybe for a while, product road mapping.
Road mapping, yep.
Executives want to see things about 3 years into the future. And
Yeah, that's a common mistake, yep.
And they want some level of clarity in terms of what's coming and some certainty there.
Yeah.
So you already mentioned it's a mistake, so tell me more about that.
Yeah, I think the first mistake is that they're only looking 3 years into the future. I mean, I would suggest a minimum 10-year roadmap.
Yep.
Otherwise, how will you ever know exactly when you're getting everything that you are asking for?
And you could say maybe like that 3 year to 10-year jump is when you go from being a strategic person to a visionary person. Maybe.
Right. I mean, that's why we should hire those visionary leaders that can really drive that into the resources to make sure that they can deliver continuously for the long run. I mean, that's resilience.
Uh-huh. And in terms of building in, speaking of resilience, any sort of flexibility or adaptability into this roadmap, what's your recommendations there?
Oh, I mean, you have to be adaptable to the things as they change. I mean, that's why you have to predict all of it in advance, and so that the best way to do that is to continuously meet with the other managers and the other executives to talk about the things that you want to do, so you can put them into the roadmap and get them done.
And we hear communication of a roadmap is arguably more important than the roadmap itself and meetings.
Absolutely. I mean, that's very insightful, because it's talking about the roadmap is actually more important than the people executing against the roadmap. Especially talking with customers and prospects, sharing with them the roadmap, making sure that you can commit to those features 3, 4, 5 years out, closing those contracts, making sure you get the sales. I mean, that's what really drives business.
And some of the companies that are doing road mapping are big public companies that have to speak to investors as well.
Yeah.
And so do you think that's a good idea to commit to them as well? Or?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you want those investors to be satiated and satisfied. I mean, it's for them that we even exist. If we're not increasing their wealth at the expense of our labor, I'm not sure why we're even here on this planet.
Yeah, increasing shareholder value.
It's the number one goal of all road mapping and all product strategy.
Yeah. You mentioned the word meetings there, and oftentimes people will complain about being in too many meetings. That's
because they're not doing it right.
All right. So what are some tips and tricks?
Oh yeah, man. Tips on meetings. Like you want to have as many meetings as possible to make sure that you're exploring all of the upfront possibilities that go into the roadmap. One of the common mistakes people make with meetings is try to put too much focus into the meeting. You hear people talking about adding agendas and possibly making sure that you can visualize that, or having someone take notes. The problem with that is that really boxes you in and dampens the creativity that could otherwise come out of that. And worse, when you limit that exploration, how will you plan everything that needs to be planned for up front for the roadmap?
Unstructured thinking, I think it's called.
Exceptionally right? Unstructured. And I mean, that's why we keep the visionaries at that spot. It's the quintessential unstructured thinking. We embody that in the visionary leaders of the company. That's why we follow them.
Sure. And there are different types of archetypes that visionaries have, and communication being a big one. I figure the folks who tend to speak more leave less to confusion or ambiguity for the teams and their stakeholders.
Really insightful. I mean, the more you can go on about a topic, I mean, you hear people talk about things like, you can say something once, but for it to really be understood, you have to say it 7 times. I think that's really shortchanging yourself. I think you need to say it a lot more than 7 times and in a lot of detail. And visionaries are also pretty busy, so it's really important that right below the visionary you have another 2 or 3 rungs of people with positional power and authority to keep saying those things over and over and increasing the talking, increasing the meetings, which is going to lead to better collaboration, more creativity, and ultimately an increase in shareholder wealth.
And then this way you communicate more. And then, as they say, you hire the right team and they'll figure it out.
Exactly.
You don't have to tell them any more direction than that.
Usually, unless they don't, in which case it's really important to help those team members
understand why it's their fault that they weren't meeting those expectations. Yes, it can be tough, but it's really crucial.
And then, on the product team level, maybe let's zoom in a little bit more.
Sure.
There are teams out there doing, potentially wasteful practices like pair programming, where if you got 2 people there, they're going to write only half as much code if they're pairing, I assume.
If you're lucky, because they're probably also just chit-chatting.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah. And I mean, while you could say, there's a little bit of a, increase in some social cohesion, we all know, developers they're just introverts. They don't like talking. They're just on their best when they're left to their own. They can plug in the earphones and they can just zone out, like get into the code, get into the flow, and then it's like Stevie Wonder at the keyboard, right? It's just, the code practically just writes itself. You don't need to worry about that. I mean, similarly related is probably even a worse practice, like mobbing or ensemble programming. It's even more wasteful because what you have is, whole teams mobbing all the time, and they only ever get like one story done at a time.
This is so great because I've been trying to do this math, because people say, hey, if pair programming doesn't lead to just half the amount of code, ideally even less. I never factored in the chit-chatting. That's how it goes from half to even less.
Now, the upside of that is with less code, you've also got less to maintain.
Yep, that makes a ton of sense. There's some, coding practices that expand maybe into product practices around, you can say hypothesis-driven features all the way down to like test-driven development.
Yeah.
This also seems very constraining.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, having hypotheses in your product it's really just a signal that you don't know your job. So you have to be very cautious about anybody who's framing anything in terms of their product hypotheses, problems hypotheses. Like, what are we paying you for? Like, you should know this. Why did we hire you? Like,
experts.
Exactly, right? Yeah. So if, I can understand if you're, new to the field, you're a college grad, then sure, like you should go learn that somehow from somewhere, because we don't have time to develop those people. But you should just know. And it's through that why did we have all those meetings? So we could know. Anyways, so clearly the hypothesis challenge is out there. I think there's almost a concerted movement to hide our ignorance, and we're framing that using these really large fancy words that no one really understands. I think the testing first is also very similar. Testing in our products, testing in our code. Again, it's a tactical manifestation of the same problem.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you need to test your code? Didn't you write it right the first time? If you wrote it, you wouldn't need a test. Very simple, right?
So here in Detroit, obviously the Ford family, Henry Ford, had a huge influence on this entire area. And, he famously said, if he had asked people what they wanted, they would have asked for faster horses. And yet we have a lot of customer discovery happening now. And it seems counterintuitive because Henry Ford obviously knows what he was doing.
Steve Jobs can.
Exactly. So what's your take on that customer discovery thing? Like, why are people doing it?
Yeah, he knew, I don't know if as many people would realize this, but he knew that people would just want faster horses. And ironically, he also knew that horses were faster than his first car. So clearly they weren't even meeting the need. So these horse-wanting people would have never even thought of, and most people only had a horse. They had no idea of like carriages, because those were only for the extremely wealthy. So yeah, there was no, you could talk, you can ask. These people are going to just tell you. The reality is, if you're a visionary, I think that's really the underlying mantra for product management is, we just know.
Trust your instincts and go big.
Yeah, go big. Trust your instincts. We know. Get it done. It's the new product management life cycle.
You got to think global, think big.
Think global, act global.
Any final thoughts for our audience?
Just remember, get out there, follow the good product development life cycle, where we just go big. We know. Embrace the exploitation and the extraction, and then just make sure that you embrace the command and control that's being provided by your visionary leaders. Find that safety for yourself.
Awesome.
It's good. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Paul Mack from Integral talks about how the evolution of artificial intelligence is going to be enabling for us versus replacing us, as well as where generative AI really tends to help speed up product development and where it may slow us down.
So there's a machine learning policy. What's that for?
So there were two big things that I think was important about us actually having a policy. One is just as an organization, this is a tool people are going to be using. You need to assume they're using it. So you want to put some guardrails out there to make sure that you have policy in place about how they should and shouldn't be using this new tool. But the other was actually to encourage people to use it, not just to prevent them from doing dumb things or risky things with it. But we realized that people weren't using the tool and getting the benefits as much as they could because we hadn't clarified, hey, here, we want you to go experiment with this. We are looking to learn where this helps us win, and we want you to share the learnings, maybe even spend an hour and make some mistakes and realize it's not worth it, and then come tell everyone else about that. So you're the last person that has to waste that hour. And so the policy allowed us to clarify that that was what we were expecting from people and gave them a lot more safe space to fail and learn and then find the wins with the tools.
That's awesome.
Yes.
That it drives adoption when you say a how-to sign that's on the wall. It's not just the how, it's also the to. And so people are doing it more. And then of course, if we have sensitive data that we're working with and other risks that we want to make sure we're not exposing any of our folks, any of the folks that we owe that privacy and sensitivity to exposing them to any more risks. Yeah, that's awesome. Then you mentioned role of AI, like the job description. Is that what you mentioned?
We literally took our job description template that we use to hire people, and we said, let's do that for AI, because what we realized in the other stuff just mentioned, the policy and then folks using it and sharing their learnings was, oh, this is a weird tool. It's like a person, like a new team member. And so it's really helpful to look and ask ourselves, well, on the operations team, on the finance team, in leadership roles, in product management, in engineering, what's the role that we're asking AI to play? What kind of team member do we want it to be? And in some ways that was helpful for us in thinking about, it really helped us use it well. The same way you would want to be clear with someone, hey, we're looking to hire a senior seasoned person that can come in and just run with things, or we're looking to hire an intern that we can train and lift up and leverage their energy and their greenness, et cetera. So similarly, it helped us to have that role description. I think it also encouraged our team as they played with these new tools to interact with it as a team member, not just a tool. And because that's really the role that generative AI plays, is it's doing believably human work for you.
And what does that role definition look like? You remember?
So it has the same structures in HR. It's like an overview of like, generally, here's what we expect of an AI system, the kind of what we're looking for in terms of basic capabilities. And then we divided it the way that some role descriptions do into like role categories, but our role categories were like our operational roles within the organization, like the ones I mentioned, operations, product management, engineering, and what kinds of things we were expecting AI to be used for within each of those spaces.
So you mentioned a variety there of like a really seasoned person or an intern. How do you kind of think about it?
I think that one of the cool things about the way that Gen AI works is it can be any of those. So I've done everything from using it as an incredibly deep domain expert to like, hey, I need you to be a workshop full of 6 different interns with 6 different degrees that they're all studying to help me do a thing. And so in terms of that part of generative AI, our advice, we talked about this in several different ways in the session, is be explicit about what role you want generative AI to play and what you're trying to do. And that's driven by your use case. So depending on what kind of deliverable you're trying to create or what kind of outcome you're playing with or information you're seeking, you can give your generative AI tool the guidance on you can scope what knowledge it's looking at, right? It's looking at billions and billions of data points. You can tell it, I want you to go look at the green ones, the seasoned ones, the whatever, and ask it to play that role, or a specific industry or domain expertise as well. You can ask it to bring to the table, and it really does shape what you get back from it.
Awesome. And what were some of the internal initiatives y'all did?
So we realized that there were a couple of areas where we had hunches that there would be high levels of ROI, and that AI would really help us. The ones we specifically focused on, probably spent the most time on, were estimating, backlog writing, so feature and story writing, and then code pairing. The idea of like, hey, this is a team member, this thing can do thinking work, so what if we used it as a pair for an engineer while they're writing code? And with each of those, we did a mixture of prompt templating, where this is just, hey, these are the prompts we found work really well, and then shared those with the team and found out how their experiences using those prompt templates was kind of the base level of what we did. And that took some iteration to get to like, oh, it turns out that these prompts consistently work, and you can waste a lot of time if you don't include this or this or this line or whatever in there, and then end up regretting it. And then beyond prompt templating, we also realized it was useful to start building some of our own tools with those things. So effectively, you're taking your prompt template and building it into a tool that walks a person through that user flow of the prompt template without them having to copy paste. Provides a little bit of additional quality control, more ease for the user, etc. It also was a great opportunity for us to learn how to get under the hood and go, okay, how do these APIs for Gen AI tools work? How does it work to add RAG in, or other tools like that? And so it gave us an opportunity, especially because the future of software is going to involve in integrating a lot of these generative AI tools into just about any product. It was a great opportunity for us to play with, hey, and a thing that we do a lot of, and we've now played with prompt templates ourselves, how would we integrate that into a tool that does it?
Right. And then you got to use it on engagement too, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, so the end-to-end engagement was useful, and even after having done, I mentioned estimating and feature and story writing in our backlog, we'd done various parts of the engagement. It was still really useful to see end to end, wait a second, if we start trying to use AI in every single step from discovery to final delivery and pushing to production, every step we're going to use AI as much as we can. And it forced us to learn, it's kind of in order, the way that we do it step by step in our own engagements, to pay attention to where it helped us and where it didn't in a more systematic way and gather that evidence. So there was a big difference, I think, in some of the learnings gathered from the like ad hoc bits and pieces we played with, to actually seeing if we seek to incorporate this every step of the way, where do we absolutely love it, find that it saves a ton of time, and where's there some strain, and it also gave some insight into where that strain could be reduced by doing it better. It was user error, and where it was just like, I mean, we tried a few different times and ways with the Gen AI tool, and we don't like the results. We'd rather just do this part by hand still.
Totally. So common misconception, I think, is you try once and it doesn't give you what you want, so you give up. At the same time, there's some level of pragmatism around how much you're willing to try before you say, hey, I don't think this is what it's meant for. Let's go use it for what it is and what it isn't, right? So what are some examples of areas where you felt like, man, my team, I am just so much better, faster, more efficient?
There's a couple of obvious ones. Anything that's like anything that requires taking a large amount of information in and analyzing it. So for example, all those Post-its on the wall in a discovery, take a picture of them, feed them into an LLM, and ask it to give you some high-level notes. I may still make some edits to that. I may look through the Post-its and realize there's a few things that I want to call out that were a little different in the room or whatever. But that first draft of some of the analysis and the framework that we would use from a discovery to save me an hour or two of reading through the Post-its, drafting that, and then iterating a few times. It takes me that first step of the way. There are similar things for boilerplate code for our engineers. It's like, this is a lot of code that gets written a lot of times, and yet we still have to go do it every project to get to hello world or to set up a certain part of our front end or whatever it is. We just have the Copilot or whatever generative AI we have available write that code for us and then refine on it as we need to.
Yep.
In terms of some of the places where it didn't help that popped up, it's anywhere where the actual human interaction is incredibly valuable because what you're doing involves stages of creativity. So like, and in transitional phases of the project, we found that the generative AI wasn't able to transition its context as well. It needed a lot of guidance that humans don't need.
What do you mean by that?
So like when you finish the discovery, you've got the whole analysis, and then you're starting into drafting your backlog. I was often not able to make the leap between the different kinds of things well, because you had to basically reset the context. And at that point, you were better off to pull out the things you've been working with a Gen AI on, finalize the deliverables yourself, and then start the process over, and check all that with the other humans on the project for refining that. Rather than trying to ask the Gen AI to go through the final process of getting it and then switching to how do we switch from discovery to execution.
Yeah, awesome. And so yeah, I think a lot of the things that you mentioned certainly were on the kind of delivery execution side. You mentioned discovery just now. So what does that look like in terms of where you found it helpful and where maybe not so much?
So I mentioned a bunch of context. In the discovery, that's what you're trying to do. You're seeking to generate a massive amount of context. And we found generative AI is actually useful on both sides of that. It's really useful at generating a lot of context. So some of why we do discovery the way we do with design thinking, human-centered design, is you want these 5 or 10 or 15 people's ideas in the room to just blow up in Post-its.
Quantity over quality.
Exactly.
First, yeah.
Exactly. That idea where it's like, yeah, I want 50 garbage Post-its on the wall, and then we'll get to the 10 good ones from that. Well, ChatGPT can give you 50 garbage Post-its in a hurry. So there's some usefulness in seeding the brainstorming process with an LLM. At the same time, it also can provide the same kind of seed for like, hey, all right, we took your 50 Post-its, we added some things of our own, here's where we ended up. Can you distill this down to 10? And you'll have the same reaction where 5 of those are great and 5 of them you're not so convinced by.
Okay.
But it does a pretty good job of at least giving you the starting point of like, is that approximately where the 10 would end up if we had to distill our brainstorm into the usable ideas, the things that we're going to turn into features or whatever it is from the discovery, where the problems we're trying to solve. It gives a pretty good initial shot at that as well.
That's very cool. And I mean, no question about the sort of ideation or generative nature of it, right? Where we've seen even before this, when we had sticky notes, when people start to see each other's sticky notes, that starts to spur ideas. And then you get the second order of sticky notes that maybe had like just newly inspired ideas. And now you don't need to wait for the second person. ChatGPT can be like that second person for you to kind of improve your first order of ideas so that you've got like a big, healthy group of things to whittle down and prioritize from.
And I also think it's important to note that that's not, like, I don't think it works well to replace the humans in the process. It's more recognizing, oh, now I come in as a human, and instead of having, like, you know this in a workshop, but you're just saying, it's like, oh, the first, like, 10 Post-its on the wall is rough. It can take a minute sometimes. Sometimes it's not, but often it is. And so you can use the LLM to get you past that hard point of the first stuff, and then adding your unique value as a person to that starting point that it gives you. And I think that's really valuable as well, to notice that it's not getting rid of you in the process, but it's starting you further down the road. We polled in all of our sessions, both in the room by hand votes, and then on our in the poll in the app, where people are at. Are they using it? They're a power user. They'd have trouble doing their job honestly without it. Are they a regular user? They use it often, but they also go without it a lot. They pick it up for a few things here or there, occasional user, or they never use it. And I was kind of surprised by how many people, the majority of people, ended up in the bottom 2 votes. They were occasional users, picked it up here or there, or never used it. And so I think there's a question that is also still unanswered. Those are going to be your lagging adopter folks. What's the different factors for them that they need to be able to use this tool well, that their organizations need to allow them to use it or to facilitate or support them using it? It's a different set of needs than the early adopters have.
In my case, I changed my homepage to it, and so when I had to look something up,
not going to google.com anymore.
You know, I personally got familiar with this when I started going to DuckDuckGo instead of Google, and it was so hard because Google is so nice and convenient. And despite just kind of all the concerns around your data and privacy and everything else coming around with it, and then, you know, on top of that, not having enough support for search engines like DuckDuckGo or Brave and other things like that. And it felt like it was writing left-handed initially. And then over time, I knew what I would go to Google for, and I would type that in the search bar, but I was surprised about how many things I could get away without needing to Google. Of course, that's a very different reason for it, but it's maybe a similar kind of habit thing that I was able to adopt here, where I said, hey, for a lot of the things that you're gonna go look up something on Google where you're researching something, and it's not a specific piece of information that's very current, that changes really quickly that you're looking for, then that was one way in the early days for me to kind of wrap my head around prompting.
It gave you the behavior change impetus to be like, all right, I'm just going to try to use it. That's fine. It popped up, I'll use it.
You add this layer of friction, right? Because now I have to go like tab the cursor, go to google.com instead of like my cursor's already in the search bar. Maybe just search, like look it up over here first.
Yeah, I think some of that goes back to the importance of effectively that's an individual policy you set. And for us at Integral, that could be something from that experiment where we realize, why don't we do that across all of our machines? Like the default homepage is the thing we want people to be using for enterprises that have an enterprise LLM. Like, your homepage could be your enterprise LLM, and that might really give you results.
I'm glad we talked about this because, the expensing the Copilot and ChatGPT was the easy one to do. Yeah. And then driving adoption. I'm surprised too about how many, because I know how many people expense that, right? Yeah. And I'm surprised that it's not 100% yet. We're pretty close. So putting it on the homepage probably will drive that too.
Yeah, if it opens up as your default.
Steve Schreiber from Integral and I get to talk about historical AI ML applications, what's changed and what remains the same based on his experience from working in e-discovery AI ML applications almost 15 years ago.
Lots of AI this year. No surprise.
No.
And you've worked in AI for over 15 years.
Yeah. I started in 2010 working on it in the e-discovery and legal space.
What is e-discovery?
So electronic discovery, if you watch movies like The Firm, where they brought in all the boxes of the papers and, they time lapse it, I've got that piece of evidence. Well, in today's day and age, that's all electronic documents, all the emails, all of the PowerPoints, the spreadsheets, the everything else, all of those are documents, and there's exponentially more of it than there ever was before. Mm-hmm. And so e-discovery is going through all of those documents and doing the same basic process of filing them, tagging them, highlighting on them, all those sorts of things, just like they did in the paper-based world, and finding out which things are related to a lawsuit itself and which things have no relevance at all.
Interesting. So I'm sure there's a lot of things that are similar, and then maybe also a lot of things that are different. So if you had to rebuild the e-discovery service now with access to the models and the algorithms and stuff that are more readily available than maybe you had to build your own back then.
Right.
What do you think is different?
So the LLMs definitely have gone a long way from what we did. What we did was early day ages that we built ourselves. We experimented. We learned a lot of things that we were doing wrong. And now when you chat GPT, some of the technology we use, it knows what we did wrong and what that was good at and not good at. LLM's really good at that. At the same time, they're a bit mystical in how they work. And so when we were in e-discovery at that point in time, it had never been through anything in court, had never been defended, and we had to have full visibility and auditability into what we did, how we did it. Mm-hmm. So if that's still true today, the fact that you can't rewind what it was and defend how you got to a decision would probably still leave me home growing so that I could have a defensible algorithm. If I didn't have to defend that anymore, I'd definitely go with the LLMs in a heartbeat.
Right. So I think I'm starting to see the trend here where if you're using it for your homework or to draft some emails and things like that, the level of implication, if there's something wrong, is not as high compared to something that you're using in the courtroom or maybe like a medical device. So tell me, if you're architecting a solution today, when would you more likely use an LLM, and when might you say, hey, let's start straight from the algorithm and build from there up? And correct me too if that question didn't make sense.
No, that makes total sense. So, the easy ones that people are doing a lot, where you can take the LLM, integrate it with RAG, throw it at, Elasticsearch database that has all of your knowledge base and everything else, is like the chatbot to augment your customer support. Mm-hmm. So that's an easy one. You can feed it in with all of the FAQs you have, your whole knowledge base that your support people might be using already. Yep. And you just trained it quickly, faster than you ever trained the humans, right? Uh-huh. And that would work very well because you don't necessarily have to worry about defending how it got the answer.
Right.
You just need it to help provide the answer. Mm-hmm. Ideally, I'd build a workflow around how it was dealing with things it didn't know and things it didn't have an answer to, and could it escalate that to a higher level? Because your human customer support escalated. They reached that point. So if I was doing something in the medical space, I think it would depend on whether it was more experimental or whether it was something that I was going to have to explain and rewind. So if it was something that was just experimental, where it was just helping me brainstorm, come up with solutions, or automating a process, still makes for all the existing technologies make for good solutions there. I think the real difference is when I'm going past the boundaries of what it can do, the easiest of which is explaining how it came to the decision and rewinding that.
And so that explains in terms of the core decision engine between when to use an algorithm, when to use a model. If I'm thinking back at 2010 timeframe is what you said with e-discovery, what are other, mobile was kind of early, cloud was just starting.
Cloud was just starting.
So what are some other things that you look at now outside of the core AI part that, would have made your lives a lot different in the e-discovery days?
Yeah, well, back then the data was exponential, right? So when it came to emails and things like that, I'd email you a document and it was an attachment. You'd email me back your revision and it was a new attachment. Nowadays, cloud storage has changed a lot too, and the implementation of that. So generally, we're not sending a document back and forth anymore. We're sending the link to the cloud storage of it.
Right.
That's changed that game quite a bit. Now, there are going to be needs to dive into the version history of it,
right?
But that's less often the need and less often the case. So
you're operating at a metadata level here versus having to actually parse through the almost same document 15 times.
And we had to write a lot of logic around near duplicates. To try to say, look, we already saw the latest version of this. We don't need to look at the other 250 earlier versions. Cloud storage changes that whole game a lot.
Let's maybe switch gears from building AI to using AI for building a variety of apps.
Sure.
Where are you seeing that different on your teams?
So what I really find interesting is how that adoption curve, it really isn't much of a curve. It's pretty binary. It's yes or no. People are adopting it and finding it's helping me. It's improving me. It's making me faster. They're using Copilot and things like that, and they're saying it's not perfect, but it just saved me a whole bunch of keystrokes. Yeah. It got me fast forwarded. There's the other people who are just like, it didn't give me the right answer and I'm not using it anymore. And I find that so strange. I heard somebody was using it to build all their tests and test data, generate test data. And I was like, that's brilliant. Why wouldn't you let it just manufacture a whole bunch of test data and create that for you in a second?
Yeah, for sure. And if it does 90% of the work, then the other 10% is going and finding in the test data case, maybe the other exceptions.
That's right.
That AI may not have the context around, but your BAs and PMs and everyone else can spend more time ideating those pieces, right?
And you and I have talked many times about like the intern. And when I'm talking with senior engineers, I tell them, I say, you are senior. You're not being replaced, but if you had a junior engineer, wouldn't you have them do some of the work and you still have to double check it? Yep. You still have to maybe edit it and take on the harder tasks. This is your junior engineer.
Awesome, I love it. And when it comes to, call it interviewing, right? I'm hearing this debate about some hiring managers not really liking the interviewee using Copilot. If we were doing like a Zoom pairing session or a remote pairing session rather, what are your opinions on this? The person wants to use Copilot. Would you tell them to turn it off? Would you tell them, what would you say?
If somebody wanted to use Copilot, I would be all for it. I would say, yes, let's do this. Let's pull that in. There was a time when people were starting to Google things more. Yeah. There was a time when that was taboo. And engineers thought, I have to know everything. I have to have memorized everything. And you're cheating if you use Google. I think we're at that same phase right now where there's people who think you're cheating if you're using the AI. And I think that's a short phase, just like we now Google all the time to help get our answers.
Like using a to-do list instead of remembering it, or using a calculator instead of doing mental math, right? For sure. I might even be concerned if they don't have Copilot turned on today.
Yeah.
Which, not all work environments support it, so it is telling in terms of how much time maybe that candidate spends at work versus outside of work.
Right.
On how passionate they are about it.
Absolutely. And how much they're experimenting with it and getting ready for it, because it's coming.
And you lead teams of not just engineers, but also product folks and designers and stuff. How are you seeing the use of AI kind of zoomed out from software development to product delivery more
right.
in general?
Yeah, so we're using it across the board in all kinds of ways. So starting with summarizing meetings, having those meetings where we're going through scope or requirements, and the AI will summarize them, pull out the bullets. We can use it to draft up the stories and help draft up the acceptance criteria. So we use it for the business side of it as well as the engineering side throughout. We use it to write tests. So it's perfectly good at doing a lot of those jobs. And again, even like a junior level skill, regardless whether we're talking a PM or an engineer or what have you, it's getting a lot of work done, even if somebody else has to refine it in the end.
So there's a little bit of a mindset, as well as maybe like a juice to squeeze ratio with test first.
Yes.
Right. And I sometimes wonder if having Copilot or having something be able to generate the test first
yes.
Continues to be, maybe still the pragmatic, efficient way, or if maybe is there a shift that may come where test after just makes more sense now, given how efficiencies change? Like, what's your instincts tell you about that, or what have you seen?
My instincts tell me that I think test first TDD is going to actually start to increase. My instincts say it's so much better, the AI is so much better at writing the tests, and once I have that, then my unit test coverage is already covered. And so writing the test after, now I'm really watching the AI to see, did it write the right thing, and am I getting the right test coverage? Mm-hmm. So I think that will shift harder towards TDD, that it helps me to have my unit test coverage that everybody wants to have.
Yep.
And it's doing what it does, the AI is doing what it does best, and making me move faster because it's writing so much of the code.
Now that I think about it, going back to your intern analogy, if you were to write the tests, and then, you had to go away to go to a dentist appointment and you had an intern you were working with,
right,
they're probably better off kind of writing the code to satisfy those tests versus giving them code and telling them, hey, please write tests against this. And yeah, okay, cool. I'm glad we got to soundboard that.
They're more likely to make sure that the tests pass.
Yes, exactly.
I actually have this dream where you're used to seeing in so many of the UIs today where there's the thumbs to, was this helpful, was this not helpful? And you don't know what happens after you click that. Mm-hmm. My thought is that's going to turn into some AI where when you thumbs down, it asks you, what didn't you like? And that will start to turn into a interpretation of would it look better something like this? And it starts to model, and that automatically generates the stories, maybe even does the code, submits a pull request. I think it's still going to go through an approval process to make sure that nobody's hacking into the systems or doing anything malicious. Still an approval process, but code writing code.
I love this. And then, you can start integrating things like Hotjar that has heat mapping and things like that you can start to infer maybe like, hey, a lot of people that have followed this pattern seems to hit the thumbs down.
That's right.
So instead of saying, what did you not like? It's saying, hey, is this the thing you didn't like? And then it kind of makes it an easier input to create that feedback loop from the user. Man, that's awesome. You're going to live rent-free in my head for a little bit with that one. So
okay.
Appreciate it.
Dinesh Sharma from Wunderman Thompson Commerce and I get to talk about artificial intelligence.
So tell me a little bit more about your favorite tools, the ones that you've been really impressed, maybe surprised, really delighted by.
Yes, I really like the feature which OpenAI has given, custom GPT feature. So is a provision for you to be able to create your own GPT.
Yep.
And with the power of public LLM, the kind of knowledge it has got, and then put into the organizational context. So you would always have different ways of doing things in your organization, different information in your organization, okay? If that is combined with the public LLM power, it is really a powerful engine. So that's where I really like that kind of provision, and I see that there's a lot of development going on in that area, and OpenAI is also working on more and more enhancement to it. So definitely is something which is one of my favorites, and would be looking forward to implementing further versions of it as well.
And so you've built a lot of custom GPTs?
We did one. So it's not required to build many, but if you have one, which is powerful enough to take care of all your needs in the organization, that's what we have focused on.
And what does it do?
It can be a one-stop shop for your entire project management community. So you have something something which is powerful enough to help you in different areas. So you can ask NLP based kind of using NLP simple interactions with the tool. It can give you the entire information. Just like ChatGPT, as a public LLM, you can have your own ChatGPT, which can be used for organizational context. And that is extremely powerful.
Very cool. And so there's a lot of things that humans used to do before that now you're taking advantage, harnessing GPT, custom GPTs to get done. Where do you think this is all going? Like, do you think we're going to have to do work in the future, or we're going to have to do some work, or what do you think?
That's a very interesting question, and I see in all the AI sessions that question getting asked from the participants. And in my view, we humans are extremely complex. Yeah? With the kind of human intelligence we have, kind of complexities we have, and the way we have been created, it's not easy to imitate. I don't see artificial intelligence or robots being able to getting anywhere near to human intelligence in any form. So our jobs are going to stay. Obviously, we will have kind of jobs which are supported by AI, but definitely we are not getting replaced by AI, for sure.
Barbara Jones from Insight talks about the 1% improvement and how it compounds daily into over 30% better, and how to apply that mindset to product teams.
If you improve 1% better each day, if you do 1 to the exponent of 365, it equals a little over 37%.
Wow.
On the contrary, if you get 1% worse each day, you'll be near 0. So it's about making habits that are positive, but also removing bad habits.
Any stories about how it's worked for you in the professional world or on your teams?
One example is I had a developer who was he was a people pleaser. And so when new requirements would come from business, he would just jump on them. And then he'd always bring other people into the discussion. And so we'd get to our end of our sprint and we hadn't fully met our goals, our commitments to the business, because we got detracted by all those other things. And once you have somebody in your team that's a pleaser like that, everybody goes to them.
Oh yeah.
So we did 2 things, and I like to call this cues and clues. What do you want to do, and why do you want to do it? So we had we've identified we created an awareness that this was a problem. And we created visual cues. At the time this happened, it was on-premise before COVID, but what we did is put up a sign that said "No heroics in the sprint room." So we identified a problem, and there's more to it than that, obviously. But we identified a problem and started by creating a visual cue to remind us not to continue that habit. With Teams, you could do it in virtual Teams. You could put something similar in your Teams meeting or chat.
Up next is Helene Gidley from A2 Agile. We get to hear about Helene's book around bringing an agile mindset to your life.
At this conference, I was exposed to a talk a few years ago, probably 5 or more years ago, and they were training us and talking about a method called Kanban. And almost in passing, the speaker mentions, and I've used this to help manage events at home. And she had a picture of a kind of a Kanban board on her kitchen cabinets, and she was managing the whole process of what needed to be done and on the oven for managing a holiday party. I think it was a Christmas party. And everything was broken down to, put the roast in the oven, put the rolls in the oven, put, this to warm up in the oven. And everything was focused around that one constraint. But it was a light bulb for me. And here's the story. You're at home and you're running an event. Let's call it the Thanksgiving dinner. You're having the whole family over. It's a big gathering. They're all coming to your house. And what's the first thing nearly everybody asks you when they arrive, what can I do to help?
Yeah.
And what do we almost always say?
Nothing.
Nothing. Oh,
Just enjoy
no.
yourself.
Enjoy. I got
Even when
it
you need
all.
the help.
Right. Even though you know you need the help, you're running around like crazy. Everything's in your head that you're thinking about. I've got to have the turkey doing in the oven. I got to put this in the oven to warm up. I got rolls to do, and we have to carve the bird. And someone has to make coffee later. Oh, who's doing the gravy? Well, I'm doing it. Right? Has the table been set? Are there water in the water glass? I mean, everything was on me. And as an Agilist, I knew something was wrong with that picture. So it was tying those pieces together from what I had seen at this conference a few years ago. And I tied it together. I said, I should just create a Kanban board for all of this stuff that needs to be done for the holiday party. And I'll just write everything on stickies. I put it up on a door wall in my kitchen, right? So it's easily visible and easily removable when we're done. And I had it down to put plates on the table, put water glasses on the table, fill water glasses, put out silver, right? Fold napkins and put on the table. So I made them small enough that people could pick them up and do them easily. And the first year that I tried it, people came over and said, well, what can we do to help? I pointed to my Kanban board, said, pick one. They all kind of looked at it and started saying, oh, okay, I know where that is. And next thing I know, they're grabbing things and doing them. And my biggest success on that was the napkins on the table. My daughter-in-law, who's very creative, grabbed that sticky and took my green napkins and did some wonderful magic origami folding and turned them into little Christmas trees.
Wow.
Cute little Christmas trees with my napkin rings on top as an ornament, and everyone had a little Christmas tree on their plate. What a beautiful result from trying something new, letting people have a little bit of control, and me letting go of all of that control. I got something far better than I could have ever done.
And all it took was for you to organize your thoughts and ask for help.
Absolutely.
And communicate it in a way that anyone could pick it up. And then you've got many hands to make lighter work, as well as some delightful things from folks who have new skills that bring to the table that you may not have.
Exactly. And
I love that.
And of course, that gets to repeat itself when that same daughter-in-law and my son, we go visit them at their house, and they're new homeowners, and we come over for a work weekend. And lo and behold, what do I see on her kitchen door wall? A whole list of tasks that we can work on while we're out there for the weekend. It was fantastic. She broke them all down, and we were able to then attack the tasks and insert breaks and coffee time and lunch and dinner. But it was a great show of their valuing our time for being out there, and our ability to respect what they needed to have done and to help. And it was a great way to organize it, and it just repeated itself beautifully.
And I'm certainly one of those guests that will just feel so much more at ease if I can participate versus feeling like I'm a burden of some kind or I wish I could help. And so it's very similar to your product team, where the more clarity and direction and participation, the more folks feel engaged.
Exactly.
I love this so much.
We ask it of our product teams. Why don't we do it ourselves?
I love that story about the organizing. I'm sure you love that you're starting a trend too on top of everything.
Absolutely, and beginning to see that happen,
So it's not just folks who have done Agile before, so much so that you've written a book.
I have.
Tell us about the book.
The Art of Agile Living. And it's a way to conquer procrastination, hit your deadlines, and reduce your stress.
Amazing.
And it's taking those techniques that I've used in both project management and in the Agile world, over my career, my 30, 40 years plus career, and tying them together into a method in which all of our work is managed. Not just the work that I'm doing for home, right? So there's that beautiful, when I have holiday parties, the Kanban board comes out. But I have a much smaller version of that Kanban board that I use for my daily work, whether it's doing project work for a customer or client, whether it's work that I have to do at home or work that's all personal of nature. All of my work is in one place, in one fashion for me to be able to manage it so that I am not running around, missing deadlines, working late into the evening, and feeling stressed. It's a way to get control over the work.
Very cool. And where can folks find the book?
they can find the book on Amazon. I am thrilled to announce that it is available. The printed copy is available on Amazon. There's also a Kindle version you can get on Amazon. We initially published on a platform called LeanPub. Yep. So there's a LeanPub version as well available. So it is widely available in whatever format you're looking for.
Amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
The name of the book is Art of Agile Living by Helene Gidley. And Helene, if folks want to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
The best way to get in touch with me is connect with me on LinkedIn. Cool. So you'll find Helene Gidley on LinkedIn.
Jeff Mortimer and Archie Woods from Slalom talk about their innovation framework.
So tell us about your talk.
Yeah, so we, my friend Archie and I gave a talk on our white paper we wrote called Innovation Eats Predictability for Lunch.
Awesome.
And we really dove into why is it so important for organizations to innovate, and talked about a framework to develop an innovation pipeline and what that looks like within your organization.
Cool. So tell me about the framework.
Yeah, so it really starts with this idea of hope, think, know. So you start with a vision where you're hoping to achieve something, and then we have something called the business value framework, which connects your vision to value, and you map that out, and then you can start to look at what are the biggest assumptions you're making as you're going after a solution that's going to make an impact on your outcomes.
Archie Woods from Slalom.
And the interesting piece there too is I'm sure that that's their perspective, that 21% are saying, yeah, we did it, when we may actually in the market say, I don't know if you really did disrupt. Even that 21%, it's probably less. And so how do we close that gap? How do we help organizations close that gap, especially because we work in consulting and we want to see clients succeed, right? We want them to go on and, if they want to grow and scale, if that's what they want to do, if they want to increase how efficient their business is, but we're getting really more and more passionate about helping them do innovation. So how do we close that gap? We gave some fun examples of things, but one of the reasons we should care about innovation is tenure of companies.
Thank you for joining me on the Convergence Podcast today. Subscribe to the Convergence Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your content. If you're listening and found this helpful, please give us a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button and tell me what you think about what you heard today.